Oh, you left my heart wide open. You threw it on the ground. Oh no, but where it is now, it's waiting to be found. But then last night I tried to call you. It rang once, then straight to voicemail. And my heart, it can't take this hurting. In the meantime, I'll be searching. I'm gonna keep on searching. I'll be waiting. Maybe I'll hear you saying, I'm waiting. I'm waiting for. Oh yeah, I'll be waiting. I'm waiting for. I've always been so optimistic. See, I'd push through thin and thick. We used to risk it all, but now it's all down the drain. And we used to stay in our lane, but you left me with the pain and the shame of being some old fool. Oh, now what was the rule? Girl, you got me feeling.
Right on. All right, Ani, bonjour, everyone. My name is J.R. Grit. I'm coming to you from Robinson Huron Treaty Territory on the traditional territories of the Tikmishing, Anishinaabeg, and of Wahnapitae First Nation. So I'm in what we now call Sudbury, and I'm really excited to be hosting IPA's workshop on accessibility as an Indigenous technology. So, accessibility was and is at the core of our traditional and contemporary ways of being as Indigenous peoples. Keeping a close eye on who is present in the circle is a value we've always had, and it's a value that has boundless potential for all living things around us. In this workshop, we'll explore our relationship to accessibility from an ancestral understanding of our body's functions and the functions of the land body we live on. So I'm really excited to introduce Brian Solomon today. It's nice to see you, cousin. I'm gonna read your bio, which I absolutely love. I read through it, and I love it. Your spirit comes through in there. It's hilarious. So, Brian Solomon is a multi-award nominated winner and loser creator. Brian is of Anishinaabe and Irish heritage, born in Shabananing on the North Channel of Lake Huron, which is where my family's from too. As a creator, his work is multidisciplinary, raw, challenging, and full of spirit. His commissions have ranged from community-rooted works with over 100 interpreters, solos in trees, to animated installations of landfill. His works have been presented and toured across Turtle Island and abroad. He is passionate about helping people relearn the nature of their ancient bodies and take back the space those bodies occupy. You can find more information about Brian at electricmoose.ca, which I actually checked out, and I loved your installation of dump bears. Is that what it is? I loved it. My papa used to bring me to the dumping Clarny all the time. We'd go and see the bears, which is probably like not what you should actually do, but I saw that and it brought me back so many memories. So I absolutely loved it. The paintings and seeing the work in the gallery. So, anyways, welcome, Brian. It's so nice to see you.
Uh, Ani, bonjour.
Honey.
Thank you for having me, Ipa. Thank you for introducing me, GR. Yeah, so I'm from Shibananing, where GR's ancestors are also from. I've spent 8 months of the quarantine since it began there, primarily. I am currently back in Tagondo, Toronto, and it's really overwhelming to come back to the city. Mostly, like I can feel the amount of concrete and other construction materials around me. Like it's a real sense. You can feel our community. There is just a couple hundred people. There's only a couple of roads that are paved. So the feeling of biomaterial around you is very, it's very tangible. I am a mixed-blooded Anishinaabe Nin. I am two-spirited, and I am disabled. And what's interesting is all of those things, I feel like they're not extricable. They're all one thing. And I am myself one thing, and we are all one thing with lots of intersections among us. So the aspect of me that's disabled, I am as a result of amniotic banding, which is a mysterious thing that occurs, something like 1 in a million pregnancies. Bands of tissue form in the amniotic fluid, kind of like streamers or shoots from a willow tree. And when it manifests, it wraps itself around the fetus. And often, if the person lives, because this really it kills a lot of babies. It gets wrapped around their neck, these bands of tissue or vital organs, and the mother will miscarry. But if the person lives, they often have an affectation on the left side of their body, below the elbow or below the knee. So almost any time you see somebody with kind of an appendage like mine, where you can tell, I didn't lose my hand midlife, I was born this way, and it's on the left side, the chances are it's from amniotic banding. So it resulted in the absence of the hand and shorter radial bones. So on the left side of my body, it's kind of like a bit shorter here. What's interesting about that is there's a whole bunch pre-birth that Western medicine has not talked to me about, but I have my own theories about. I think if these tissues were swimming around in the womb, I would have experienced some danger early on, and anybody who's survived amniotic banding would have had a feeling of danger for their life as it started to wrap around their body. And as most people tend to be right-handed, and your heart is around, the left hemisphere of your torso, I think we would have pushed everything off of us. So sort of struggling from the beginning to get this off. And I think it would have wound up like a spaghetti ball and pasta around the left side of the hand or the foot, actually. And then it would have stayed in a clump there and inhibited the progression of the appendage. But what's really interesting about that to me, and the gift of that, is that there was an energy of fight from the beginning, the good aspects of fight. And it's not something we often think about when we think about the fetus. We're usually thinking of the mother's fight, which is very real. Many mothers lose their lives in childbirth. Their body is pushing and working in overdrive their whole pregnancy, sending so much nutrients, and ancient systems start up and start flooding all of this energy to the fetus. But indeed, every single one of us had our own push for life inside there. If we're alive today, if we were not if we didn't pass in childbirth. So I'm assuming you're all alive watching on Zoom. Maybe the ancestors in the room too. You pushed for this life, and that's a huge part of who we are. There's actually, if you're born in this world with legs and with thighs, babies, when you hold them up, they have this automatic motion of walking, and they kick like kickboxers. You feel them getting ready to come out in the later trimesters within the mother. And what happens when the amniotic fluid leaves the womb, that baby is pushing up against the pelvic floor to get out. It's starting to lose oxygen. It also knows it has to push to live. So there's this relationship with our mothers, pushing and pushing and pushing to live. And you should do this on your own sometime. You could get up against a wall and put your feet sideways on the floor and push. And your body will make a natural spiral, and you'll start to reach out with your hand and your head. And if you weren't born a breech, as most babies are born head first, that first motion is our first push for life. And it's inside all of us. And what's so exciting about that as a disabled person is when there's a variation in that system, then there's this whole other slew of intelligence that comes out with it. And this segues into the philosophy of the talk, Indigenous accessibility as an Indigenous technology. You can just really pull apart those words, and that's the whole hour. You don't even really need to be here. Accessibility is like a modern word ascribed to disabled people, differently abled people. But I think you'll find in not just our own Indigenous societies, but most Indigenous societies and older societies in the world, accessibility was so embodied, and equity and care was so overarching that there wouldn't be a need to come up with a term like accessibility. So it's birthed out of our time, and it's very interesting. It's very superficial in its nature, the idea of accessibility. The things that get cared for within that term are the most obvious things. So when I go back to my own introduction, I am a light-skinned Native person. I am two-spirited, but at moments, I'm not visibly queer. I'm not visibly two-spirited. At moments, I'm not visibly niche. And at moments, I'm not visibly disabled. So it's like I could show up in someone's psyche in one moment as a very able-bodied, white, straight male. But in actuality, I'm all these other things, which is in total opposition to that. So it's interesting for me, if I were, the times I do receive prejudice from the world, I'm not sure what it is, actually, what they're turned off by me. Why are they following me around the store? I'm not sure what thing they clued in on, but they're following me around the store for something. Often when you see a visible disability like this, and it's fascinating. It kind of looks like a Tim Burton-esque stub hand. That people are aware that there was thalidomide children in the 60s and 70s. So doctors, knowing that this drug would cause birth defects, knowing it is the important part. We're giving this out to to women, and there was people with a type of malformation with their appendages. So people look at me and they assume that my mother was on drugs. Very interesting, wild. That's like a, you know, it seems very extreme, but I receive that question a few times a year from strangers, like, oh, was your mother? And my poor mother, she's so straight edge. She would never knowingly have taken anything that would have hurt me. And then it enters a whole other realm, you know. There should be more compassion for people who are born affected by chemicals that could have passed through their parents. But then also that will pass down to me. So often people will maybe think, if I were walking around in a store, that I am on drugs as well. But they're not, you know. Or what else is interesting is they won't see the left side of my body, but they'll see the things that I'm holding. You know, maybe I'm holding a few items that I'm gonna buy, but because I use my whole arm as a hand, the item is not over here, you know, it's very close to my body. So often store clerks will think I'm stealing stuff when I'm just actually holding the things that I'm buying. I use this to illustrate that because it's a less obvious disability, it goes over people's heads. You know, if I'm getting change, that's like maybe in the shopping experience, my most anxious moment is the change. You know, you're in a store, maybe it's a big, you know, block store that you've had to go to. You've had to go to Costco for something, and there's 20 people in line behind you. And if it's the before times, they ain't, you know, observing this 6 feet thing. And, you know, you've just spent all of your hard-earned money and they're just trying to rush you through. And actually, like, it takes me much longer to process the exchange of cash and change, or my card, my bank card, if it were that. Because they're not visibly seeing me as a disabled person. I've caught myself before thinking a lady in front of me was taking a very long time. Why was it taking her so long to put her things in her bag and get her change away? And I was getting quite frustrated. And when I saw this person on the other side of the cash, I realized they were an elder. They just looked so darn good. Like, their skin was so good, their hair was so good. I assumed they were decades younger, and I was confronted with, like, I think I'm looking at an 80-year-old who maybe looks like they're in their 40s or 50s. So there's all sorts of things that slip out of our awareness with where everyone is at, because of this standardized world that we are grown into. And I think this is the heart of the perversions we find ourselves in now, as it pertains to accessibility. You know, so now it just sort of sits here as a buzzword that the people would like to not be labeled as an entity that is not accessible. So they find themselves doing certain things. You know, they put in a wheelchair ramp, which is great. Put in a wheelchair ramp. And then they still wonder why certain people don't come to their establishment. They could hire ASL for you know, a production. And then they wonder still, you know, why did nobody who's hearing impaired or deaf come to our production? Well, because you're still entrenched in a world, a capitalistic world, that has no value for these people. So you didn't go there. And this is where we've departed so far from our indigenous cultures, that you cannot you can't see value in the thing that doesn't produce capital. And I could go down a whole other thread about that. If you do not produce capital, you don't exist. So, how are you going to work in a factory? You can't walk. How are you going to, and we understand how we treat our elders as Indigenous people, and how it manifests today in the world, and it makes you sick to your stomach when you see how forgotten our people are, our elders. And I think that's another thing I'd like to highlight within this whole thing, so when I say I can't distinguish the part of myself that is differently abled, the part that's two-spirited, the part that's Anishinaabe, because it's all one. It's the capitalistic world that has pulled me apart in these ways. And in one room, one thing might register, and in another room, another thing doesn't register. So another key, when we can look at ourselves as Indigenous people and the technology within this, when we go back to who we are, you don't need to go any further than to see how we treat our elders, to see how we inside of us treat differently abled people. It's not, and I think also people kind of get that wrong outside of Indigenous communities. They think, oh, they love their elders, they cook for them, they knit them things, they're up high. No, my elder is my boss sometimes, My elder is my critic. My elder is my grandmother, my greatest love. My elder is so many things. My elders have roles. We have jobs. We are constantly in relation to community and how we could possibly be helping and serving community, and that gives us joy. So the elder is not just a pretty idea. It's how we contribute to our communities. So the value, the capital in this pre-capitalistic culture is immeasurable. You can't measure the capital that an elder brings. You can't measure, I was in a residency with Luminato, with GR, and you brought up computer literacy, which it's blown my mind, and it's stayed with me ever since. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I have this little Alexa thing, and I taught it to respond to computer, like on Star Trek. I digress for a moment. But I find myself in a place with computer literacy, and I look at elderly population in a place with computer literacy, and the computer is everything, undoubtedly, in our age. So if you don't find yourself in there, you're nobody. Your worth is, what could you possibly contribute? So when I look at the value our elders bring, there's also a lot of popular discourse about the value that two-spirit people bring to the table, and our many words. Agukwe, there's a great person doing a lot of research, Dr. Harlan Prudent, who in the West Coast is compiling names for two-spirited people across Turtle Island and the world, and there's hundreds of names for us, which shows our place in this discourse. We're starting to understand our ancestral wealth within that, but it's rooted in what we bring to the community and roles. They're not just these beautiful tokens. It's our roles and what we bring. And there is intelligence in the differently abled body. For myself, because everything is so orientated with two hands, about every week, or at least every month, and many times in a year, I have to go through a process similar to a child of relearning things. So when I first grew my hair long, I had to figure out how to braid it. And I got my mom and my cousins and stuff to braid it for me at first. And then it's like, no, this is going to be the weekend. This is going to be the Sunday that I sit and I figure out how to braid my hair using my stub as a clamp, usually to braid. And it's interesting. It's very painful for a more able-bodied person to watch this. And it gives me so much joy. I have the benefits of constantly having to relearn things with my body. If there's a new video game, you know, like I want to try some virtual reality thing where you got to hold two things, I have to sit for like an hour before I engage with the game to figure out a way for me to use this technology. And there's an immensity of teachings within that I get reminded of constantly. So there is a wisdom within that I'm very grateful for. I wouldn't change anything about that. That wisdom in our communities is valued. And I feel very valued in my community for that. When I look at my home community, you know, I saw people who, because the population is smaller, I never saw anybody quite like me. I knew people who were missing limbs from gangrene resulting from diabetes and poor health care. So I saw amputees a little bit, no child though. But you know, it's just dirt roads and potholes. And you would think, wow, that would be a nightmare to live there, being differently abled. But actually, I think you have a far easier experience in a community like this because though through colonization, there's many aspects of ourselves that we've lost. I've always found in our First Nations communities that there's still, there's a level of value for equity and accessibility that's, it's almost inarticulable because it sits in here, you know, so that person who has no legs, maybe she wants to go to the hunt camp where you have to go up, you know, 100 meters of rocks before you actually get to the camp after being in a boat, you know, all afternoon to get to this place way out in the land. How does this now disabled woman get there? We haul her up. We physically haul this woman up. And you look around, you go, oh my gosh, where's Auntie? We should try and get her out. We should try and get her out. So accessibility is here. I was once on a panel of an art center, and they were trying to redesign a building. And they were trying to make this utopian building that's like the most accessible building they could ever make. And they got together the freak show, which I can say and you can't. Which is, you know, what just happens, you know, like it's, you know, we're a bunch of white able-bodied people. Let's get together a bunch of disabled people and see what they would come up with designing a building. So, you know, when that happens, and I've been a part of that a few times, it's like, okay, cool, you called the freak show together. And you know, what comes out of that is there is no building that is possible that you could build that would encompass every single person's difference. So then we must look outside of that difference of accessibility. There's also no building that you could build that would encompass everyone's cultural diversity. Every other type of diversity that exists, not just the disabled body. That's where we shouldn't be pulling ourselves outside of this concept. So the truly accessible building is within, and that is at the core of our values as Anishinaabe people, but you know, at the risk of using a pan-Indian term, I will say this is a pan First Nations Turtle Islander concept that I've always seen, that who is in the circle is of so much value. We're constantly looking at who's missing. So, you know, we have a concept of people who are more able-bodied traditionally. You know, it's people in their late 20s into their 50s. You know, we've got a term for that in the medicine wheel. You know, you're in your summer years. You're in the South. You're full of fire and ability to create. You know, you might be a war chief in these years, but it's up to those people to look and make sure, where are the elders, where are the children, where are the sick, and beyond all of that, where are the four-leggeds, where where are the plants in this discussion and in this circle. And that manifests and has different indigenous language attached to it in all of the different societies I've encountered. But it's so at the core that there's no structure you could build that would reflect this. But what's beautiful, there are structures we did build that manifest this. We didn't use wheels, but we had animals. I'm gonna briefly share my screen and show some beautiful things that come out of our people, and you can really feel the love in the shape of these things. So let's see. I'll just go desktop, and you'll see my messy desktop. Can you see it? Yeah, little thumbs up. Miigwech Grayson. Okay, so this thing here, this has many different words because it exists in a lot of different societies for us in Turtle Island. But it's an Indian trough. They exist on dogs. They exist on horses in the plains, but we had some horses that made them this far, and they're often carrying, heavy packages. And the whole world, we use animals in this way, but you'll find that that we use humans to also carry. We carried our sick and we carried our elderly who couldn't walk with us on these devices that go by many names, but we had our own versions of them, Algonquin peoples and Iroquois peoples, but you see them quite a lot in the plains. And it looks very comfortable to me, actually. Travois. I am not a francophone person, so this is the word that French ascribed to it. I think this last one is a shot in the 1800s of a Blackfoot elder being carried on it, and I also think there's a colonial gaze with how we look at this image. It could appear as though she's being trotted off somewhere, but who's to say she's not telling them where to go? She's just getting pulled. But I feel a lot of love when I see how comfortable and well wrapped she is. So these things manifest in our technologies, and a very popular one is the cradle board, which exists in so many cultures. I love this modern one. This is from a Zippy Wing workshop. But look at how happy all of these mothers and grandmothers are with their work. There's so much love in these things. They're incredible. They're so comfortable with babies. If you've ever seen a fussy baby be put into one of these things, it's the ultimate swaddle. They feel like they're right back in the womb. They just, and they're so safe. You can see some of the designs have these headpieces, which will also protect the thing if the mother fell. So there's lots of manifestations of how our inclusion looks in terms of technology as differently abled people. One fact I love to push out to people is that sign language, American Sign Language, all of the sign languages in the world stem from ASL, from American Sign Language. So it's a British Sign Language, Swedish Sign Language. There's many different, there's a Canadian Francophone, a Quebec Sign Language, but they all stem from American Sign Language. And this is something that, as an Indigenous person, is indisputable about the history of sign language, but it's not totally accepted in the history of American Sign Language, but it comes from our people. There's many different types of sign language that exist here. I was doing a workshop recently with Ange Loft, and she's looking into forms of Haudenosaunee sign language, which is really incredible. There's a Cree sign language, and a really, really famous one is the Blackfoot sign language, where a lot of ASL was appropriated from. I've seen Blackfoot elders not be trained in American Sign Language and be able to understand it all almost word for word. So if you want any proof of how much this thing is taken from it as a language, but it is an Indigenous technology that, like all of the technologies that we've given the world, I mean, they're not accepted as being rooted from ours, but it's rooted in accessibility, and it's not just for differently abled people. It would have served definitely elders and others who are deaf and have hard of hearing. But we traveled so far in our lifetimes. We know this, the thousands of kilometers, certain gatherer tribes and would go and trade routes that you would get to places where you didn't speak the language. So you needed a language, and the thing that unites us all is our body and our hands. So there is a universal language that comes out of the body and comes out of nature, and it's stemmed, and people could start to understand each other. And you'll find yourself that too. If you find yourself, with somebody who doesn't speak the same language as you immediately start using your hands and your face. Your face becomes really animated, and you start speaking. So this is what I mean, where these things are not they're not inextricable from each other, but our care for our elders, and our elders, if you break up the definition, do start to become disabled in their ways. It manifests with our care for all forms of accessibility. There's a really beautiful man in our community, Johnny Heights, who passed away, went into the spirit world this time last year at the beginning of the quarantine. Maybe their spirit knew and was like, I'm getting the heck out of here. Good for them. Good time to go. They had been sick for on and off for between 5 and 10 years. And they were doing really well, and then their health started to go. But while their health was going, this guy had horrible hips, could barely walk, and a body that's just falling apart, cancer eating up his body. But his nephew had just acquired and started working on one of our sugar bushes in the Bay, which are some of the most ancient sugar bushes in the Great Lakes, are the ones in Jibananeng. And he'd worked in many sugar bushes his whole life, and he had such a love for this place and was so excited that his nephew was starting to work one. That was the last place I saw him. He died just a few weeks later. And he's not just gonna, so it's the thing, here's he can barely walk and whatever else. His nephew would have hauled him on the machine, made sure he felt comfortable for the ride, went out there. And you know, what's he gonna do while he's there? He's not just gonna sit. He wants to feel useful. So he was the camp cook. And I noticed that a lot of people who are disabled or who are very elderly in the hunt camps and in the sugar bushes, they're the cooks, because it's not going to be too laborious for them to move around the kitchen. And, you know, they could sit and they could rest while they're, you know, stirring over a big pot over a wood stove. So I got to drink some nice stew that he made, you know, just a few weeks before he died. But that role, and you better believe it was probably some of the best stew you could ever eat, because it's an old Nish guy's thing, and he's putting all of his love into it. So it's not just like, oh, you know, Uncle Johnny, this is your thing you're gonna do. It's everything, you know, like, I'm gonna learn from this still. There's so much value in this still, and they need to be brought with us, brought with us. And I think you can look into your families and see this. And I think even for people of European descent, you can do older European traditions, and you'll see these same values, that it's about bringing people here with you. Nearing the end of oh my God, I had like 10,000 things I wanted to say, but I just can't be wrapped up in an hour. But that's all right. Whatever was said was meant to be said. Okay, the drag sled. I got to the drag sled. Got to the papoose, the cradle boards. Okay. The when you're looking at bringing with us, since we are the Indigenous Performing Arts Alliance, IPA, I am a storyteller. I forget that. I guess I'm an artist. We're all connected to this somehow. How does accessibility fit now in our contemporary worlds? And often, as Indigenous people, we can often struggle with aspects of our culture being seen, understood, accepted in colonial containers, like a theater space, an amphitheater, or a TV set and a camera. But when it comes to accessibility, we get picked up and shaped and pushed. You know, you might have all of these ideas, but this is the one I'm gonna buy. So accessibility is at a loss immediately. And this also comes from the capitalistic model with high art. And that's a whole other thesis for me, my anti-high artness, which we're all connected to. I am paid by organizations and traditions, contemporary art traditions that are rooted in high art, because it's capital. And that can be encompassed in I have it and you don't. And it's magical, it's beautiful, and you don't understand it. And it's so intellectually rich and inaccessible that it's gold. And if everybody had gold, gold would be worthless. So my special high art thing that only I can do with my beautiful beauty and dance and visual art, it becomes incredibly exclusive, so that there's no way accessibility can act. Like they're like this. Accessibility doesn't find itself into those spaces. And you'll see that with the value system of art. Like in the before times, half of my practice is stuff that would be called community dance, community engagement projects, community performance art, community visual art, community. But that context of community, before whatever title is going to emerge. And it is immediately not seen as high art, because there's people there that that aren't trained. There's people there that didn't go to fancy schools. There's people there that don't fit. So it's lesser. For me, those works that I've created in communities, I've done work in enfranchised communities, at-risk communities, in shelters, people where there's heavy substance use, struggles with ousted travesti communities in South America, and so many intersections, color and disability on top of that. People who can just be seen as the trash of society, and they're usually the greatest artists I've ever met. And they fill me up and teach me so many things, and my able-bodied self, my light-skinned self can use that privilege to get some money together to do a project. But those projects will get no attention from high art communities. They might check some boxes off for accessibility, but they're not seen as works of art. And there's this separation that goes on within that. And when I look at how we would have been taught traditionally storytelling and anything, music, dance, drumming, there's no distinction among those when we would have been storytelling. Now you got to dance the part of the story, You would have had somebody who spent 20, 40 years doing that dance, doing that song, but you have a little kid in the community who wants to learn it. There was that kid couldn't stand or learn from that. The circles were more diverse. When we say diversity often in high art institutions, I don't think people have the slightest idea of what that might mean. It truly means everybody who's missing from this circle. I'm getting a little.
I'll read that out to you, Brian.
Yeah. No, it's a perfect time to release a little bit glitch for that. Letting me go on that little tangent. There's an immensity to speak about with accessibility with our communities. That's really just a seed.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about when you're talking about like high art and all this stuff, I'll often see that with craft work often being swept up by like certain things by high art, and then it becomes intellectualized, and then everyone's like, wow, this is amazing. And it's like, but that's actually just from like community art. So I feel like that sometimes that'll happen. Like I'll hear folks who have gone to school, for, they've done their masters in art and all this stuff, and then they'll take something that is very community oriented and kind of flip it and make it into something inaccessible and like really intellectualized, and to a point where you're kind of like, well, I don't understand its purpose anymore. And then they're just like, it's because you didn't go to school for it, and it's like tra la la. So I can really, I've seen kind of that side just a little bit, so
I think you've probably seen it a lot. Like it's at the core. It's at the core of it. Our the whole world is sitting here for us, and economy and capitalism is created for, not for us. So the things, because we have a heartbeat and we're alive. Somebody who is in the spirit world has access to all of these other things that we have no access to, or we get little bits of access to. But if your heart is beating, you have access to so many things that could possibly have no value. And the odd economy of that is that it's also what's missing in our lives. So if you were to search for the most accessible space, as somebody with developmental differences could have, somebody with different sense differences, maybe there's trouble seeing, trouble hearing, trouble speaking, trouble smelling. The thing that everyone can feel is the thunderstorm. the most accessible thing is a thunderstorm. It was meant for every single human being. And that feeling and that excitement and that fear you get from it, you can feel it. You can smell it if you can't see it. You can certainly see it if you can't hear it, and you can feel it. It's the most, and that is the thing, the natural world and our bodies connection and our bodies as land is the most accessible thing. So I don't think people should go out, especially Indigenous people, we shouldn't go out and be trying to, how do I get a disabled person to my work? Go into your work and find already what's differently abled, and then those people will come. To circle back to what I said before, you find institutions doing things, outreach with different boxes, and they wonder why that community still doesn't come, because you're truly not interested in that community, and that's fine. It's actually, it's not fine, but it is what it is. It should be a truthful engagement. But us as Indigenous people and as creators, when we find the things that we siphon off, and that goes with Indigenous peoples of every ancient culture, the things that you have to take out to be palatable for the greater mainstream audience, those things you took out were the things that would have brought in other people that are differently abled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've often thought about but also often we are hired as Indigenous people, as Two-Spirit people, as folks, who are seen kind of as leaders or as maybe representing, whether or not that's true, representing different intersectionalities. I feel like we're often asked to draw those people in to spaces that have not historically really accepted us. And so I find too that sometimes it's that often gets put on us, but we're we just want to art. We want to just be artists and art and be here and be fully ourselves. But now you're also asking us to draw all these folks in that you don't historically have a relationship to, and I feel like sometimes that's a lot of responsibility that we can't do that. And so that's where I think you were kind of talking about that relationship and having authentic relationships with folks. If that's really what you want and care about, then put time into those relationships. It's not going to be this overnight solution, which I think a lot of people want, right? They just want to be able to go hop on online shopping, buy solutions, and then they have it, and then it shows up on their door, and they're like, "I fixed it." But that's not how this works, I just want to read out some of the comments too. I know we have a few minutes, and I know we can go a little bit longer too. But from Andrea Simon, Quay Brian, let my shine acknowledge your shine. FYI, I'm from Elsie Pug Tug, New Brunswick, and I have a cousin, Brian Solomon. Oh, and I just want to remind folks too, if you have any questions, if you pop them in the chat, we'll be able to get to them momentarily. But so far, just a lot of really nice comments for you, Brian. Nova Bhattacharya says, inspiring as always, thank you. Amanda Joseph says, thank you so much for presenting today. Crystal sends a heart and some lightning bolts. And Carrie Karbiar says, loved everything you had to say. Gzagan, my brother. I don't know if I did that right, obviously, but if I said anything wrong, folks can just send me messages and I'll correct for next time.
Oh, Miigwech for those messages. Yeah, I think too with the going in, I think where you see the other Indigenous technology, and we should see these things as technologies, our thought systems, our medicines, our technologies. I'm reminded of a teaching from Basil Johnson of how we would have learned through our senses as children, and this has no value in the post-colonial world that we're in. The British education system, which has swept over the world, and in some way or another is the same one that everybody has been taught. some things take a position of preeminence. Your eyes, certainly our eyes on a screen take a position of preeminence. So when you're left out of that world, you could imagine the world you're left out of. But every single one of our senses is meant to be our teacher. So as two-spirited people going in, and all of the brilliances, and there's so much brilliances. It's a technology. Our bodies are a technology that we can bring to our communities. You know, like it's I also think, like, with people, like, it's not some big mystical thing, how we would have cared for our elders, or how we would have cared for two-spirited people or disabled people. It's like, it was practical. It was like, these people are here, what can they bring to the table? Like, oh my gosh, they're really good at all of these. And we're not the only mammals to do this. I've learned that there's other mammals, lots of mammals, elephants, certain types of whales care for their elders past what we can see through biology would have been their natural life cycle. They're living longer than their bodies would have, because there's so much value in their bodies. So what a different world that would be if we went into and explored each of our, because we all have accessibility barriers. Again, that's the fallacy of the idea of accessibility, is that actually you have a tennis elbow thing, you have an invisible disability in your psyche, you have all sorts of different abilities.
Yep.
And cripness, problems, but they're brilliances, because we know physiologically that our brain, the tapestry of our nervous system, actually just expands out and adapts. And if we sunk in to that, so we can do this ourselves. That's the beginning of the process of creating the accessible space, is looking for all of the value, everything that all of your perceived shortcomings have taught you. Then you see them in every people around you, and then hopefully, the rich white presenter will start to see the value too and bring them in. I don't know.
But I think, it builds kind of empathy as well. Like when you experience pain within yourself, then you can kind of look around and see, like, how does that manifest? Well, like, I experience a lot of chronic pain. So it's like, it manifests as grumpiness and lack of patience sometimes, or like all these different things. So when I'm out in the world and I see those things kind of like coming out of other people, like, it can make me like kind of pissed off of like, well, I didn't do anything to you. Like, this is what I'm saying in my mind. But then I'm kind of like, oh, you know what? I wonder if they're just experiencing a lot of pain, because like it doesn't always show. Like, so for me, because of like surgeries and this and that, and like I have so much chronic pain in my shoulders and my chest and all this stuff, and it's really painful. And then from playing guitar for years, in my wrists and this and that, and so you can't really see it. Like, I'm still doing all these other stuff, but I have noticed over the years how I will move my body in a different way that I think for the people is really simple, to like reach up and grab something off a shelf. Well, I can't really do that. I'll actually lose a lot of strength and ability to move, and I'll probably drop that thing, and it'll be a bit traumatic maybe. I see how, like, walking through the world, like, people will see you in a certain way. Like, same with me, like a light-skinned person who, is non-indigenous and who is fully able, but I'm walking around in my pain, and I'm walking around in my, who I am, and who I am in my culture and in my communities and all this stuff. And it's just really interesting to see, like, yeah, like, what do people see when they see me, and what are they forgetting, and what are they not seeing? And so I think it, if we were just a bit more cognizant and we're a bit more tapped in, we would see the ways in which we could be more empathetic and sympathetic between each other, for each other.
Absolutely. And for everything else around us, like not the separation for our body, but our body is everything. I'll use this to segue. I see Nova has a question. You mentioned the time before. Now tell us about the future. All of those things we we carry in our ancient bodies is the only future that we have. So when we look to the many problems in the world around us, we need not look even much further than our bodies' needs to solve these problems, and our bodies' needs and rights to be in these spaces. I think if we could bring more and more and more of ourselves to these structures that we're in, they have no choice but to crumble and reform. Nova has a bunch of incredible practices that come from an antiquity that's so great. You could call it indigenous. It is an indigenous form that Nova's working with. She's working with classical Indian forms of dance.
Amazing.
But specifically Bharatanatyam, I don't know. She probably knows a whole bunch more things. I have no idea about her, but everyone's got their secrets. These things need to be brought into spaces, and we need to we have to sit with them and stare at them, and all of the things with no context. You know, all of the things with no context. I see parents of disabled children feel the shame for their children and make big mistakes often, and not bring their children to spaces because they're embarrassed for their children. And it's like the presence of their children and their children's different reality will not just heal the humans around them, but it will heal every dang thing around you. The reality of there being more elders in spaces is so necessary. It would change everything around us. Like that's the future for me, and that's our healing and our need for our bodies and our bodies as land to be in relation to land. More people having right to land, more newcomers and immigrated bodies having right to land and feeling the truth of the land in relation to our stories. That's the only future that I can see these things evolving out of.
And land that is, cared for and not polluted, and we would hope in our future. I'd like to read some more comments so that I could just so you could be showered in goodness. Craig Commanda, nice to see you, Craig. Quake Akina, great talk. Really love the discussion on over intellectualizing community work as fine art. Andrea Grobin, Oakenshield says, thank you. This was really amazing. Sends some hearts. Bethany R says, thank you, Brian, with a smiley face and a fire emoji. Raquel Fee Baptist says, very happy to have been able to listen today. Thank you for sharing your story and perspective, Brian, with a heart. Then you already saw Nova's as well. Amanda Joseph says, yes, I agree that all people, disabled, elder, able-bodied, each have a unique value and bring different levels of wisdom. Thank you. And then I opened the chat in Facebook and I saw Nova wrote back saying, so humbled. Shh.
Nova. Everyone should check out Nova's work.
And Craig's work too. I'm loving the 3-dimensional, other dimensional kind of beadwork that Craig's doing. Is really cool too.
I love that you brought in to the convo the distinction between craft and others, and that comes out of the Massey Commission in Canada, actually in the 50s, where I don't know how to essentialize that. Canada was very afraid of communism. So you'll see the big push for the Canadian identity. There's several big pushes. There's one at the turn of the century that happens too with the Group of Seven that relates to the Dump Bears stuff. And then there's another one in the 50s where a whole lot of Canadiana comes out of this like the cottage country aesthetic comes out of these vast peopleless lands that are there for you just at a price. But in shaping Canadian identity, this commission went out researching for a couple of years from coast to coast to coast, what should be funded and what should be brought forward, and what is just a waste of time. And you should check it out, what they say about inquiry into Indian arts. It's chapter 13, I believe. It's incredible racist stuff that I won't even give too much the time of day of, but that's where they talk about Indian arts as regrettable and just like dated craft work and all of this stuff. But and they should be encouraged in every way to pursue the arts as other Canadians do. So they still wanted to see Indigenous peoples in there, but transform into this thing they needed them. And I think that's the part in the capitalist system where there's no responsibility. So the Massey Commission gave way to the creation of the Canada Council for the Arts. The Canada Council for the Arts was the model for all of the other arts councils, provincial and municipal. And it also funded all of these initial legacy companies that come out of the 60s and 70s. And these values are still undoubtedly in place. And you see that with what's funded and what's not. And these terms craft that are still ascribed to cultural work. But people, this also touches the future. Anybody in a position of audience, any person who is a presenter of any type, any publisher, any person who has a relation to funding research or any committee must challenge themselves to fund things that are outside of these aesthetics of ableism, are outside of these capitalistic aesthetics. You have the power, you have the money, you must take this risk. You know, if you're funding Indigenous work, you should not just constantly be funding the poverty porn stories, these feel-good things that sit within these stories of white saviorism and heroism. The stories of disabled people should not just always be rooted in ableism, how great you feel overcoming and all of this stuff, because that actually is an oppressive force on us. We have to constantly live up to that. So that is an arms that everybody who is in a position of influence must take up. You have an ancestral responsibility to take that up and curb yourselves.
Miigwech. I think you and I could probably talk all day, but I know that we've gone past our time a little bit, which is something I am usually guilty of. So I'm, but I think that's a great place to kind of pause and let folks sit with that message. And just want to say big miigwech to you for sharing your genius and sharing your experiences. And there's a lot more comments too that I wasn't able to get to and read that I'm sure you can go back to after and have a look at. Brian, yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that. I'm going to take a moment to also thank our sponsors, but also, thank IPA, the Indigenous Performing Arts Alliance, for hosting this workshop, putting this together, and inviting Brian. I want to thank Toronto Arts Council, Ontario Arts Council, and Department of Canadian Heritage for their support. And I also want to let folks know that next week there's another workshop as well on Tuesday. So it's mental health during COVID. Next Tuesday, April 20th from 3 to 4 p.m. Facilitator is Carolyn Crawley. Carolyn will share the importance of self-care and coping strategies that support one's mental health during these challenging times of a global pandemic, climate crisis, and injustices. People are experiencing higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. Carolyn will share several Indigenous perspectives, guide sensory experiences, and share ways to support one's immune system along with mental health. So join us next week, next Tuesday, April 20th, from 3 to 4. Again, Facebook Live, and also I think on YouTube Live. And come listen. And if you have any questions, there's always an opportunity to ask them. And so again, miigwech, Brian, so good to see you. So great to learn all this from you. It's been a total honor.
Likewise, miigwech. Thank you so much to IPA and all of the funding bodies for taking your risk and funding things that are outside of our structures. Yeah. Enjoy our wildly weird, different, beautiful bodies. Awesome. Bama P.
Oh, you left my heart wide open. You threw it on the ground. Oh no, but where it is now, it's waiting to be found. But then last night I tried to call you. It rang once, then straight to voicemail. And my heart, it can't take this hurting. In the meantime,